5 learning outcomes will be covered in this PowerPoint. Number 1, what is business research? 2, what is the business research process? 3, what is a theory? 4, the goals of theory. And 5, the different types of business research. Businesses use data to inform decision making. They collect data on employee engagement, on customer service and satisfaction. Is that business research? It's part of the process, but it's not the complete process. Let's begin with having a better understanding of what business research actually is. Collecting data on customer satisfaction or employee engagement is part of business research, but it isn't what business research is in its entirety. Basically, business research begins with identifying problems or gaps that need to be addressed in a particular business. And from those problems and gaps, being able to generate important questions that require some answers, some questions that are meaningful and useful to the business itself. It's driving at and trying to get truth about a particular phenomena. And those questions help us generate and clarify what we're trying to understand. And it also helps us to identify what would be the best method and approach to be able to answer those particular questions so that we can get a better understanding and a truthful clarification about that phenomena. To get you started to think about this concept of business research, I want to introduce you to a project that was conducted at Google called Project Oxygen. And at Google, they've done a lot of experimentation around management. And one of the initial experiment was introduced by Bryn Sergey, one of the founders of Google, who thought perhaps within their organizational structure, they didn't actually need managers. So one of the things that they did in their business research is they first wanted to answer the question, do we actually need managers? Do managers matter? And the second question, emerging out of their first question, is if they do matter, what in fact makes an effective manager? So business research comes from, as I said, a concern or thought and some questions that emerge from that thought. Can we have an organizational structure without management? So we first have to ask, that's our first question, do we need managers? And if we do, how can those managers be most effective? Well, being that Google is an IT company and their expertise come from data and evaluating and analyzing big data, they decided that their approach to these business questions or this business research was to take a quantitative approach, to use the data from the organization to answer those questions that they had. Do managers matter? And if they do matter, what makes an effective manager? So they took a quantitative approach, and what they did is they evaluated employee surveys asking their employees, do they think that there's utility and a need for managers within the organizational structure? They found from those surveys that the majority of their employees did think that managers were essential and they were needed within the organizational structure. So the second question was, so if they do matter, and they found out that they do matter, what can we do to find out what makes effective manager? So their second approach was to um, conduct surveys, a secondary employee survey, where the employees identified key attributes or key behaviors of an effective manager. And they also combed through the data of employee manager appraisal surveys. And they looked at those appraisals, and those managers that were deemed to be considered highly effective, they looked at what were the attributes and the behaviors of those managers with high performance ratings. And so they took those two pieces of data and they were able to come up with what um, was the most effective behaviors for an effective manager. Using the two quantitative data collection methods was the first one was being the employee survey measures, and the second one was the performance appraisal measures. They were able to find patterns in the data and simmer it down to 8 behaviors that were key to being an effective manager. The first one being a good coach. Number two, when managers empowered their teams and didn't micromanage their team. Three would be creating an inclusive team environment and showing concern in the well-being for your team. Number four, being results and productive oriented. Number five, to be a good communicator and to be able to listen and share information effectively. Number six, to support the career and development of their employees. Number seven, to have a very clear vision and strategy for the team. Number eight, to also have strong technical skills themselves to be able to coach and advise their team. Number nine, to be good collaborators across the organization. And number 10, to be strong decision makers. So here you see from business research that was conducted at Google, they identified a problem and from there simulated or some questions, some key questions, and then designed a methodology to be able to answer and address those questions. And from that, they were able to develop an effective management model. An organization's business strategy will drive the type of business research that they will conduct. If they're a product-oriented firm, they're going to emphasize the design of the product. So they're going to be interested in conducting research that gives them better insights on how to improve product design. If they're a production-oriented firm, they're going to be focusing on how can they create efficiencies within their organization. If they're market-oriented, their focus is on customer. So much of their research is going to be oriented towards getting an understanding of customer preferences. To get a better understanding of this idea of business research, I think it's important to put it into a historical context. I'd like to introduce you to the concept of the scientific management theory. And that concept first appeared in the academic literature on management in the late 1800s or in the early 1900s, forwarded by a gentleman by the name of Frederick Taylor, and also a notable gentleman in the study of management was Henri Flavoy. And those two gentlemen represented what we call the school of classical management. Up until the mid 1800s, early 1900s, the way businesses managed themselves, it was more intuitive and a gut feeling approach. There was no systematic study of management in literature, and they're the first two to adopt a particular framework to get a better understanding on how we can most effectively structure organizations and set up management um, practices to make businesses more effective. They were preoccupied with efficiency and productivity. That was their emphasis. And their belief was that if we applied the scientific theory to the study of management, that we may be able to better understand how to more effectively run our businesses. So this is where that business research has actually emerged from. In order to increase the reliability and validity of results coming out of business research, the classical management approach introduced the scientific method to business research. The components of business research include a problem or a gap to be addressed, questions that address that problem, theories that may explain those questions or problems, a method approach, either it could be quantitative or qualitative, a research design, a way to collect data and the process of collecting that data, then some methods to evaluate and analyze that data, which could be some statistical methods if you were using quantitative methodology, or being able to do content analysis if you were doing qualitative research. And then finally, drawing some conclusions that either confirm or dispute some of the questions and hypotheses that you have formulated when you started to initiate your research. In all business research, there will be a theory that exists. A theory is like, it's an explanation of a particular phenomena, or it may be a rule or a model. So let's go back and think about the Google Oxygen project. In that particular research, they had a theory that their organizational structure did not require management. And so one of the first questions that they posed is, do they even need management? So they were trying to confirm or dispute the original theory that perhaps their organization did not need managers. Business is studied at the micro and the macro level. They are social systems and involve understanding individuals' behavior. Business theory in itself does not have its own school of theories. In fact, it instead borrows from a number of different schools of theories. Because it needs to understand individual behavior, it borrows from psychology. Because it is social systems, it borrows from sociology. It also borrows from organizational behavior, economics, and labor relations. The goal of theory is simply to explain and rationalize or provide rules or clarification on a particular phenomena. In the case of business research, we're trying to get a better understanding of different behaviors or phenomena within business. On the screen, what you see is a model that was developed by Cobbler and Ross to give us a better understanding on how people experience and react and behave to organizational change. There are three types of business research: exploratory research, descriptive research, and causal research. Exploratory research is used when there is very little known about a phenomena or a business problem. An example of this would be one organization that I worked for previously, where we were trying to identify whether our organization actually needed a developmental program for women to encourage them into leadership roles. So we conducted exploratory research. We designed focus groups that targeted questions of organizational leaders, asking them whether they felt that the organization needed such a program. Descriptive research is typically conducted after exploratory research, where organizations already have a good, or researchers have a good grasp on the problem or phenomena. In this case, descriptive research is seeking to paint a picture of the object or people or group or the environment to get a better understanding or more thorough understanding of the phenomena. So for example, with Zehrs Markets, they were looking to see what was the demand for organic products within their stores, and who were their customer segments, and where did those customers exist that wanted to see more organic product or produce within their stores. So they conducted surveys of their customers to solicit this type of information, and they were able to discover that their customer segment that desired and wanted organic product or produce existed mainly on the west coast of Canada and in communities of 500,000 or more, and tended to be middle-aged women that were seeking this type of product. The third type of research is called causal research, and this is where we're trying to seek relationships between variables. We're trying to see cause and effect. There are three levels of cause and effect relationship. There's the absolute, conditional, and contributory. Absolute means that the cause is absolutely necessary and sufficient to bring about the effect. So there's a strong relationship between variables, that one influences the other. Conditional means that the cause is not necessary to bring the effect, but it is sufficient to bring about the effect. Whereas contributory is the weakest causal relationship, and it supposes that the cause is not necessary to bring about the effect, but it does have some influence. So in business research, we do study cause and effect relationships, but it is recognized that those relationships are often at the moderate to weak level. But it doesn't mean that it's not valuable to study cause and effect relationships. We just recognize that certain behaviors or conditions can be brought about by a number of different variables, not just one single variable. An example of this would be, what is the effect of people's productivity when they work from home? So this is an important question that's being asked today under the COVID-19 situation, where many organizations' employees are now working from home. Businesses are seeking to discover what is the relationship between telework and productivity. Is telework causing employees to increase their productivity or to decrease their productivity? So in this situation, they're studying a cause and effect relationship. Whether we use exploratory, descriptive, or causal research will be driven by the objective of the research. There are specific stages that the research process goes through, and it always starts with defining what is the objective, what is the problem, and what is the gap. Before we even start to define our questions or our methodology of answering those questions, we first go to the academic literature. What is already known about this problem or concern in business? What do we already have? What other conclusions have been come to? Whether they're exploratory or descriptive or causal research has previously been conducted on this phenomena. It is only when we understand what is known that we can start to define new questions about the phenomena or the gap. So you have to do a thorough literature review. And a literature review just means that we've gone to the peer-reviewed journals on and done research to determine how many articles have already been written on that. And we start to read through and get an understanding of their findings and conclusions. If we discover that there's a gap or that our specific question is not being answered in the academic literature, then we will design our own research to begin to try to answer our question. So our research question will drive the design of our research, whether it's going to be exploratory, descriptive, or causal. If we find that there's no previous academic literature on the problem, we may decide that we have to do exploratory research because this is an area that's very little is known about. And so we begin with the question, then we determine what is our sample of a study or what is our sampling frame. So what groups are we looking to research? And how are we going to find our answers? What is our methodology? Are we going to use focus groups, small groups with experts in it, or will we have a survey instrument to solicit the answers from the general population? How is that data going to be collected? What questions are we going to be answering or asking when we do the collection of data? And then we will do analysis of that data. And depending on what approach we take, will drive the types of analysis that we do. Will we do a review of what has been said by our participants? For example, if it's a focus group, we will look for patterns in their answers to come up with commonalities between responses to create a model or a theory. If we're doing quantitative research, we're looking to confirm a hypothesis. So we may get into some statistical correlation or regression analysis. And then from that, we will draw our conclusions.